Conversation, the Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody, and a belated Happy New Year to you all. I've been away on a bit of a break, but I've come back because the phony war is over. There are 82 days to go until Brexit, until this great historic moment. At least, I hope there are just 82 days to go. But we were chucked straight back in to the debate this morning, and where better than LBC's Breakfast Show with Nick Ferrari, with an interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg. And here was Mr. Mogg, who, remember, is not just a Member of Parliament, but also leads the European Research Group with about 60 or 70 members. And this was him talking about the government preparing for a no deal.
They are planning for chaos at the ports in this country. Or are they not?
Do you recognise that they're planning for chaos, Jacob Rees-Mogg?
They are making plans in case there are problems in Calais, but there are all sorts of other ways of bringing drugs into the country. Well, the drugs that you can't stockpile, you can fly in.
Right.
Some drugs.
So it's like a Berlin airlift, Mr. Rees-Mogg, in reverse.
No, I think talking in these exaggerated terms is hysterical.
I'll bring you back in. Let's just hear from Mr. Rees-Mogg. Chris, hold one line. Let's come to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
There are some drugs that you can bring in and you can stockpile for a long time. There are some drugs that have short lifespans.
Temperature-controlled drugs.
Temperature-controlled drugs. You just have to arrange the way in which they're brought in. But we are under control of how things come into this country. The only risk you're talking about is that if Calais gets blocked, then the Dover-Calais route gets blocked. But other routes have much longer lead times, and therefore there aren't likely to be blockages at those, so you just have to bring things in via other routes.
Chris,
this is not particularly complicated.
And this is where the debate is. The debate is, if there's a no-deal Brexit, does everything stop? Does all trade stop? Do medicines stop coming into our country? Could there be millions of people placed in danger? There was Jacob Rees-Mogg's response to it. But Nick was also joined by the head of a body representing the British pharmaceutical companies, a guy called Mike Thompson. And Nick put to Mr. Thompson the comment that every member is currently stockpiling medicines to Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Every member is doing that. And I think that's why patients can be reassured that we are doing everything in our power to make sure that we can get our medicines to them, even though this is the biggest logistical challenge that we are facing. And our message is, when parliamentarians come to think about the options ahead of them, no deal is something which they should avoid at all costs. I don't want to get involved into the politics of this. I'm just saying that no deal creates significant challenges for us. We're as prepared as we can be, but undoubtedly things will go wrong. You know, there are over 12,000 medicines which are licensed to be used in the UK. That's a massive challenge for us.
Well, no particular real surprise there that the giant pharma companies want to keep things as they are. This is how Jacob responded.
Lots of countries trade outside the European Union and don't have clogged up ports and get pharmaceuticals delivered to them. It's assuming that the EU...
That's not changing a 45-year agreement, probably. That's why it's a different situation, of course.
But there is another agreement. There's the WTO on which we can trade. And you've got to ask yourself, why would the EU break its other international agreements? Why would businesses make their own lives more difficult? And why would the UK... introduce arbitrary checks to make things more difficult? None of this is going to happen. It is part of the Project Fear, and it's making assumptions that will not turn out.
Well, part of that Project Fear is Operation Brock, which is the Department of Transport's plan for managing traffic flows through Dover, should there be a no-deal Brexit. I mean, can you imagine if we were an independent country trading along the same rules as most of the rest of the world? I mean, surely it would be a disaster. So, what happened today was, from Manston Airport, which of course has been disused now for over 5 years, 89 lorries turned up and they drove down to the port of Dover to find out what chaos would this cause. I have to say, knowing that part of Kent well, quite what difference 89 lorries would make along a very busy route, I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. If they were serious about it, they'd have probably needed at least 1,000, maybe 5,000, I don't know. But anyway, it's all part, we're told, of the government's preparations for a no-deal Brexit. But what I want to ask you is, do you actually believe the government is genuinely preparing for a no-deal Brexit? Is an operation like today's lorries, the debate we had this morning about drugs coming into Britain, is this all part of sensible planning? Or is it all just an over-the-top exercise designed by the government to frighten MPs into voting for Mrs May's deal next Tuesday? Are they being responsible, or are they trying to frighten the pants off us? That's the question that I want to know. And if you think, no, the government is being mature, responsible and doing the right thing, call 0345 6060 973. Or if, like me, you think actually the government are pretending to get ready for a no deal, but actually 2/3 of the cabinet would never contemplate it, the whole thing is a complete charade, text to 84850. Or, of course, you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And, of course, Facebookers, you can comment there too. And please, if you were one of the 89 drivers involved this morning in those lorries, or somebody on the Kent roads, somewhere between, Sandwich and Dover this morning, please get in touch and let me know. Already Terry says to me on Twitter, what are all these no-deal stunts? May is authorising costing. All those lorries don't come cheap, nor does dredging the harbour at Ramsgate for a company with no ships, captains or safety certificates. Well, I tell you what is interesting, Terry, is I've felt for a long time that maybe we have too much reliance on the Dover-Calais route. Seems to me we have perfectly functionable ports at Ramsgate and at Folkestone. All right, I do accept Ramsgate needs some dredging, but you've also got the mayors, of cities like Ostend who are actually desperate to nick as much business as they can from Calais as possible. So there are many, many other options out there, whether Chris Grayling is right to grant this possible deal to a company that yet hasn't got any ships, I don't know. But should we be using other ports than Dover? Should we be spreading the load with or without Brexit? Well, I tell you what, as someone who lives in Kent, and even as EU members, we've seen Operation Stack too many times over the course of the last few years. So spreading the load, to me, makes a little bit of sense. Anton from Devon says, I don't think it's project fair. I also don't think it was necessary to do this experiment, but I suppose it can show the government and the public the way things could go. Well, Anton, generally what's happened here is the government have said we're preparing for no deal, and yet minister after minister tells us what a catastrophe it would be. They are not genuinely preparing for no deal. That is my view. What do you think? What does Donna in Sherborne in Dorset think? Good evening, Donna.
Oh, good evening. I'm just phoning really to say that today's Little Manston Airport stunt was an absolute farce. The DfT already know how that will work in the event that there is an Operation Stack required.
Yep.
Because back in 2015, that's exactly what they did. The French were on one of their routine bouts of industrial action. Operation Stack on the M20 was put in place for about 2 weeks.
Yep, Donna,
on and off.
I remember it.
That's right. I mean, it went on for quite a while. Usually it's only a couple of days, but on this occasion it didn't. And it was therefore decided that Highways England would lease Manston Airport. So they did. And for several weeks, I think it was about 600 HGVs were parked up there using the channel crossing when they could, on the first in, first out basis. Facilities were provided for them and it all worked wonderfully. So quite why they needed today's little stunt is beyond me.
No, but Donna, I think you raise a very important point, that even as members of this wonderful, glorious European Union that so many of our MPs think we should stay part of, even as members of it, we get repeated problems, don't we?
Well, absolutely. Operation Stack has been put into place over 200 times.
I know.
Since the mid-80s, it's quite a routine thing for Kent Police or the Highways Agency or Highways England to manage. They just leap into action. The Manston thing back in 2015 was new, but it was implemented. It was extremely successful, and that's why they're going to do it again. They don't need to test it.
No. Donna, I take the point. I think you're right. Thank you. And Donna pointing out quite rightly that Operation Stack has been put into place time and time again. Why? Because we have a total over-reliance on the Dover-Calais route, and because the French fishermen, if they want to protest, or the French rail unions, if they're unhappy, can hold us to ransom. And that's as members of the European Union. What does Mike in Hemel Hempstead make of today's little stunt?
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call. Yes, as the lady said, we've had Operation Stack so many times. We've got pretty good at it.
Yeah.
I think this was more of an exercise to show the EU that we're serious about making preparations for a no-deal Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Not even a no-deal, really. It's WTO, which is a deal.
But Mike, do you think that Monsieur Barnier and Mr. Juncker, at least before lunch, do you think that they at any point think this government are serious about a WTO Brexit?
No. But the thing is, we've only got until the 21st of January, as far as I'm aware, and then default Brexit comes into force. So,
well,
if
in
no
theory,
deal is agreed by the 21st of January, then we go into default Brexit.
Mike,
no deal.
In theory, you're right. In theory, this deal has to be agreed by the 21st of January, which is why when Mrs May says that she's going to put her deal to the vote in the House of Commons next Tuesday, just for once, she might actually keep her word. Now, that's not to say that the 21st could not be pushed forward in some way through parliamentary procedures, but you're right. 82 days to go until we leave. The 21st of January, in theory, a red-letter date. Time is running out. But, Mike, I just want to ask you this. Had Mr Juncker and Monsieur Barnier and Tusk and the others thought from day one that we were serious about a no-deal Brexit, might we not have got a better deal?
It would have been a totally different story. But as always, Nigel, business will find a solution. It's a bit like water always wins. Business always wins. Whatever problems there are, businesses always find ways around
That's
it.
Mike,
time.
that is completely my view. Thank you. Anyone that disagrees with that? Anybody that thinks we're headed for a catastrophe? Maybe even worse than not joining the euro. Remember that 20 years ago? If we don't join the euro, the city will close down, the car companies will all go. Anybody thinks I've got this completely wrong? 0345 6060 973. And Anita, who lives in Ramsgate, says, I think today's debacle of the lorries leaving Manston was rather like Dad's Army. Anita, I think you're pretty much on the money with that. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Rizzo. Disused airfield at Manston used as a lorry park. A test of 89 lorries driving to Dover to see what it could be like if lorries get backed up in the event of horror of horrors, a WTO Brexit. Is this all part of the government putting together a series of stunts to frighten us about a no-deal Brexit, or are they just being responsible and planning? Well, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, delivered an urgent question today to the House of Commons, demanding that the Prime Minister update the House on what has changed since December. This is what he had to say about the preparations.
Today, we see the farce of lorries being lined up to stage a fake traffic jam in Kent to pretend to the EU that the government is ready for a no deal. A stunt that the Road Haulage Association described as window dressing, and one of the drivers described as a complete waste of time. The government is fooling nobody. These shambolic preparations are too little too late. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, there is no majority in this House to support no deal. Why won't the government face up to this truth and stop wasting our time and our money? The Prime Minister should be here updating MPs on what progress she has achieved, if any. Instead, she's continuing her approach as before Christmas of ducking scrutiny and dodging accountability. We will hold this government to account for their incompetence.
Well, it's difficult to disagree wholly with Jeremy Corbyn there. What has changed, Mr Corbyn was asking, since before Christmas and the delay of the vote on Mrs May's deal? Well, the answer is nothing. Just, Mr Corbyn, there's now just 82 days left. So we are entering into, folks, perhaps one of the most important 2 or 3 weeks of modern British parliamentary history, and perhaps the most important vote we've had in the House of Commons since about 1940. So these are very important days. Peter on Facebook says, they have lorries backed up like that in France all the time. Peter, they do. We do focus a lot on Operation Stack because much of that is caused by French industrial action. But it is true that I see those queues in Calais on a very regular basis. I go through the Channel Tunnel regularly. In fact, I'll be going through it in exactly 12 hours' time. Off to Brussels tomorrow morning. Trina says, I think another referendum on the way. God help us, Trina. I hope you're wrong, but I'm beginning increasingly to think that you may well be right. Nick says, same with the millennium bug. Everyone thought the IT systems would crash with total meltdown for the UK, and yet it went past without any drama whatsoever. And the same goes, Nick, I've said it once already, I'll say it again, about the euro. 20 years ago, if we don't join the euro, disaster will befall us. Well, that's not been the case. And I get anonymously, I get a text saying, Nigel, I think this is all a futile attempt of scaring the EU into renegotiating Mrs May's woeful deal. Well, there are two things here, aren't there? One, she wants to be seen to get a concession of some kind from Brussels on the backstop. Will she get it? Well, you know something. It actually suits the European Union for Mrs May's deal to go through. They like Mrs May's deal going through because it sends a big message that actually you can never really properly leave the European Union. And given that the Eurosceptic party, the AfD in Germany, have over the course of this weekend talked about changing their party policy, saying unless by 2024 there's been significant reform, they will become a party campaigning for German Gexit from the European Union, you can see why in many ways they might be prepared not to make a big legal concession, but at least some sort of window dressing concession. But the real issue here is all of this is being done. All of Project Fear is being done into terrifying Mrs May's own backbench MPs into backing her deal, which we guess will come before the House of Commons next Tuesday. She made it pretty clear. On the television yesterday, it's my way or the highway. If you don't back my deal, there'll be no Brexit. How dare she, is all I can say. James is calling from Pinner. Good evening, James.
Yes, hello, Nigel. Good evening to you.
So what do you make of today's little stunt?
Well, let me just... I will come to that point. Let me just position it slightly. I'm a procurement guy. I did 22 years with the largest UK pharmaceutical company, one of the ones that was named in the by the guy this morning.
Okay.
And I'm totally involved with all that sort of history to that piece. I then went on to do risk management, and I was actually the head of risk management for the largest airports group in the UK as well. So I know a lot about that sort of stuff. There's a couple of interesting points that guy made this morning when he said that there was the pharmaceuticals guy who turned around and said that these companies, those two companies that he named, which I'll name them, which was this was
James. This was Mike Thompson, the chief executive of the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry. Just to be clear.
That's correct. That's correct. And the two companies that he named was GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca. And what he said this morning was that those companies have invested £100 million to deal with the Brexit issue, to deal with quality assurance clearance of goods coming into the country. That would absolutely exercise me. I was trying to get hold of Nick Ferrari and just shout that down. Let me tell you why.
Well, you've got your chance now, James.
Exactly. The point is, I worked in construction within that company when I was doing the contracts, and that's what I do now. If you started a project on the day that referendum vote came back, so I'm talking about start a project to say, I need to put these facilities in, and you started at that point in time, I guarantee you it would not be delivered for 4 to 5 years. So anything that's in the pipeline that he is trying to badge as a response to Brexit is complete rubbish, because it would be, if they are going to deliver those facilities, they would have started that much earlier. Now, one other point.
But James, let me just come back on that quickly, please, because there seems to be an assumption that it might be very difficult for drugs to come into the United Kingdom, whether they come in by boat or by lorry or by aeroplane or by drone or by goodness knows what other method they may come to us. There's this question of quality assurance. But given that at the moment, right now, we are in total synergy with the rest of the European Union in terms of rules, of production and of standards, isn't this a complete red herring?
It is a red herring, and I'll tell you why. Because the way the system works at the moment, it just works on certificates of conformance, which is where obviously every good that comes in with a certificate that confirms it meets the relevant standards. The issue they've got at the moment is that the EU are not prepared to accept UK certificates of conformance on drugs. That doesn't give us a problem per se, because all the time we're turning around and saying we will accept those certificates of conformance on imports, then those goods are not held up at all. And it's just effectively going through the system. There'll be no difference. It's up to the Europeans to decide if they want to do that. But what people need to realise here is that we're talking about drug companies. You take, those two that I just mentioned. They work on a principle which is called think globally, act locally, which basically means they put local manufacturing into the markets and then they coordinate it globally. Now, what that means is that they can switch that manufacturing back to the UK as quickly as anything, because when they license a product, if they license it with the UK, or if they license it with the FDA for the US, they license the facility. So if you go to one of the Glaxo manufacturing plants, it's licensed to manufacture drugs for all different sorts of markets. They can switch that manufacturing into the UK in a couple of weeks.
Well, isn't it worth mentioning, James, that just 2 miles away, perhaps a mile and a half away from Manston, is, of course, the little town of Sandwich, where Pfizer had a massive... In fact, I think that's where... certain drugs that middle-aged men take. I think Viagra was actually pioneered there in many ways.
Yes, it was.
And of course, Pfizer now produces no pharmaceuticals at all in Sandwich, does it?
No, it doesn't.
So if they wanted to, they could reopen. James, let me just... I mean, clearly, you were 22 years in the industry. I want to hear from you. Can I just ask you one question? Mm-hmm. We have heard... And I've sat in this studio with Lord Adonis and Alistair Campbell and many others, and we've been told that with a WTO Brexit, there is a great risk that people suffering with diabetes and many other conditions will not get the drugs they need. Can you assure them that is not the case?
Absolutely, 100%. That is not the case. It won't be for anything to do with Brexit if there's any issue with drugs. There'll be, if there was an issue to do with some sort of product recall, which was to do with something, that's completely different. That happens occasionally in the pharmaceutical industry. It won't be anything to do with Brexit. It won't be anything to do with supply chain. These things, when Glaxo, they will air freight things and not think twice about it, because the actual premium, the value of the product itself is so high. To air freight something is just a marginal adjustment.
Yeah, because they're making big bucks, James, on this stuff. James, great call, fascinating. Thank you very, very much indeed. And I'm told on Twitter the government achieved less today with their truck stunt than could have been achieved in a couple of hours with computer modelling. It was all for show and a charade. Well, so much of this Brexit debate since the 24th of June 2016 has been a charade. In particular, Theresa May's repeated assurances that we're leaving the single market and the customs union. You're listening to The Nigel Farrow Show here on LBC. It's now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa. So in Manston, Kent, the disused runway that's there, Bomber Command Base during World War II and Fighter Command 2, was used for 89 lorries to run down to Dover as a dummy run to test what would it be like on Kent's roads if there is a no-deal Brexit. Why was it done? Was it a practical test? Was it just really part of a sort of useless stunt, all trying to tell us that a no-deal Brexit's a disaster? But, Kent, in so many ways for the last 2,000 years, has been in the front line of just about everything in this country, whether it's the Vikings, it's the Romans, it's the building of Martello Towers with the threat of Napoleon, it's the Dunkirk evacuation, whatever else it is, Kent is always involved. And as it has been over the course of the last couple of weeks, and since I've been away, we've seen quite a number of dinghies, ribs, coming across the channel with, and you can choose whichever words you wish. I would say illegal migrants, others would say asylum seekers, choose your words. But today, I understand that another empty boat was found on a beach in Dungeness. And I'm going to go to LBC reporter Talia French, who is down in Kent. Talia, what's the story today?
Well, a group of 8 migrants who travelled across the channel in an inflatable dinghy have been found by officials now. A Coast Guard search was launched in Kent today when the empty boat was found on the beach at Dungeness. It was just after 8 this morning. The maritime operation was stood down once it was clear no one had been left stranded in the sea. Then some hours later, police and Border Force were seen 3.5 miles away in Lydd with some men. And these men had been offered for blankets and police jackets to keep themselves warm. The Home Office has said 7 people were in Border Force care and 1 was in hospital, and then a 9th man has been arrested on suspicion of facilitating illegal entry to the UK.
What I can't understand, Talia, is, Dungeness is the nearest thing we have to a desert in southern England. There are no trees, hardly a plant above a foot or 2 above the ground. How on earth could 8 people who've just got off a boat walk past a nuclear power station, get as far as Lydd without being detected?
Yeah, it does start some questions.
Bewildering. And tell me, I've been away for a couple of weeks, but obviously catching up with these stories, do we actually have any idea how many people have landed on Kent's beaches?
Well, this is actually coming now as this operation, while there have been concerns over the number of migrants trying to cross the channel. In December, the Home Secretary declared the situation a major incident and then announced plans to bring 2 Border Force cutters actually back to the UK to add to the patrols. Of course, we've got the Navy vessel, which was on patrol this morning, being used to guard the channel until the cutters return. Mr Javid has actually said that in almost every case, the people who go on to make these journeys in these circumstances do go on to claim asylum in the UK. Those who do claim asylum are given a medical assessment before then being transferred to immigration officials for an initial interview. They're provided with accommodation while that application process goes through the system. And of the 504 migrants who have tried to cross the English Channel last year, 276 managed to get to British waters and coasts.
Talia, thank you. Don't take a holiday anytime soon, OK? Because I can see the weather forecast and I can see a lot more boats coming. And why? Because of the 276 that Talia talked about, that we know of, that have got to the UK, not a single one of them has been sent back anywhere. Once you get into the UK, say you're from Iran, claim asylum, you're not going to be sent away anywhere. And unless we adopt the kind of policies that were used by Tony Abbott, who was the Australian Prime Minister, when they faced a seaborne invasion, albeit a bigger one in numbers than we face. And Tony Abbott said, anyone that comes here and sets foot on our soil illegally via this route will not be allowed to stay. And until Home Secretary Sajid Javid, you and the government are prepared to say that, then the numbers will continue to come, and I would guess they will probably escalate too. Interesting, isn't it, that Salvini, the Deputy Prime Minister in Italy, who's pretty much said the same thing Tony Abbott from Australia said, since he said that, do you realise the numbers landing in Italy last year reduced by 80%? So don't tell me there's nothing government can do. There's plenty. I suspect, though, sending in the Royal Navy, sending in more vessels, just means that we'll ferry more people, albeit in safety, to this country to stay. Back to staying with Kent. It's all Kent this evening. The exercise at Manston today. Was this responsible planning or just an attempt to scare the pants off us? Alex is a new caller from Doncaster. Good evening, Alex.
Good evening.
So what did you make of it today?
Well, frightening.
Go on.
Well, we were called in last week to work early with an outside HR company, and if we leave without a deal, we're losing our jobs.
Why are you losing your job, Alex?
Because we make parts for commercial vehicles.
Right.
And this country don't make commercial vehicles, does it?
Well, it makes some, but very few in number. So you make parts for commercial vehicles, and you sell, and I presume you sell most of those parts to the rest of the world, yeah?
Not to the rest of the world, just one part of the world.
Really? Very unusual business, Alex, then.
Yeah. You know, European trucks are different to Australian trucks and American trucks.
Right, so you're telling me that, and I don't want the name, but you're telling me that the company you work for sells 100% of its product to the European Union?
We sell 92%.
Right, OK. So why will you not be selling your product there after you've left the European Union?
Because 3 of our biggest clients have all said that we're operating on world trade terms, They will just keep the production. They produce in house. We just top up their supply. And they've said they'll keep the production in their line.
Alex, if you're producing parts for commercial vehicles, what tariff would that attract?
At the moment, from what I can gather, there's no tariff because it's free trade.
I know, but given this catastrophic scenario, what tariff would those goods incur?
I don't know. I don't follow politics.
2.5%, 3%. Alex, let me just say this to you, and I understand you're concerned about your job, and you're in one of those companies that's exporting to Europe, and I genuinely understand that concern. But can I just say this to you, that the amount of tariff with a no-deal Brexit under WTO rules that those goods would incur would actually be less of a factor than the currency movement every single week between the euro and sterling.
All right. So why does my company feel the need to bring an outside HR company in?
I don't know, Alex, and I can't answer that. And maybe I don't know how big your company is, but if it is one of the big corporate companies, isn't this all part, perhaps, of corporate Britain trying to scare our politicians into not leaving the European Union at all and forcing us into a second referendum?
The company employs 115 people.
But it's not a big company then, so we can't call it a big corporate. Well, Alex, maybe they're making contingency plans. Do you know, I've heard this argument that if we leave on a WTO Brexit, we're heading into uncharted waters. Do you know something? Any of us that have ever worked in the free market know that every single month we are in uncharted waters. There are all sorts of disruptions that can occur to us, and I absolutely, and I mean this, take the sincerity of your call, but Alex, I would say to you that the worst case scenario with the products that you are making is a tiny percentage tariff would be put on them. It shouldn't affect your business, frankly, in any way at all, and particularly, Alex, if overall the markets see a no-deal Brexit as being bad for the economy in the short term, sterling will fall, your prices will be even cheaper. Alex, I wish you well, I wish you luck, and I thank you. Alex there, genuinely concerned about his situation. But there are lots of reasons, folks, why firms do well and why firms do badly. This idea, this is some giant leap in the dark to take back our independence, that is what people working in the free market live with every single day of their lives. Mike is a new caller from Sleaford in Lincolnshire. Good evening.
Evening, Nigel. So the previous two callers, I agree with James, the first of the two last callers, about it being a charade.
Yep.
And I also sympathise with Alex. However...
Well, so do I, Mike. So do I. So do I. I sympathise with anyone losing their job for whatever reason it may be. But I do not, Mike, I do not buy that just because a product is going to incur a small tariff, in the case of a manufactured good, may be different if you're selling milk or, other products like that would incur a much bigger percentage. But, Mike, shouldn't we be viewing this as an opportunity?
Absolutely. I was just going to say that. We should be using it as opportunity. And companies like the one that employs Alex should be more aware. We've had 2.5 years to adapt, find new markets, do different things, make slightly different parts for different companies. In that 2.5 years, if that hasn't been done, the onus has always been on the employer and the manufacturer to find these new markets. If that's not been done, that's neglecting your employees and your business. And it's good business practice at all times to find new markets. We are the UK. We've been through this so many times. We've gone through difficult times and good times, and we've always managed to adapt.
Well,
and
of course.
That's one of our strong points.
Can I use Mike, a really, really unpleasant, nasty word that we're not allowed to use in public these days? It's called competitive. And if we're in control of our own laws, can't we just become more competitive than the rest of Europe?
We certainly can. I am actually the originator of that petition that's been online so much. Petition 229963.
Do you know what?
Which has broken all records on the Parliament.
Do you know what, Mike? I was actually going to mention this after the break. I really was. I talked to my producer about this 10 minutes ago. As you're there, folks, as we speak, there is a break from Brexit in the House of Commons. They are discussing future leaders' debates at general elections in this country. They're doing it because it's got over 100,000 signatures. But there's another petition that I understand has got over 300,000 signatures that wants Parliament to urgently debate, what is it, Mike?
the actual leaving of the European Union with no deal.
Brilliant. Mike, I tell you what, I think that's a debate we ought to be having on a much bigger, better scale. I thank you for your call and for your initiative. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:46 and time for the news headlines with Lisa. Well, I'm talking about Manston Airport. I'm talking about 89 lorries that are driven down to Dover as part of the government's apparent no-deal Brexit preparation. And I was asking whether this actually was part of responsible government planning or just part of the ongoing campaign to scare the pants off us so we don't have a no-deal Brexit. But the debate I'm really having with you now is, are you scared of a no-deal Brexit? And in many ways, that is the debate, because you know something? Despite Project Fear telling us that we won't get drugs, that people with diabetes will be in terrible trouble, it seems to me what's happened is actually the Leavers are now hardening in their position. The Leavers now overwhelmingly want a clean break from the European Union. And if that means that we leave on WTO terms, then so be it. That's where we are now with this debate in the country. I just don't think Parliament is anywhere near that. That's my view. Let's go to Steve, a new caller from Cobham. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening. Good evening, Nigel. As you say, I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
I wasn't really much of a fan of yours initially, but I thought you were a bit of a right-wing lunatic, but I've changed my opinion completely.
I'm just a lunatic, Steve.
I think you talk a lot of good sense.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Thank you. Now,
anyway, but moving on.
Yeah. Now, Steve, should we be scared? Should we be scared of a you know, if Mrs. May's deal is no good and it's a rotten deal, and I've always favoured a free trade deal, but if none of that's possible, should we be scared of a WTO negotiated Brexit?
No, I don't think we should. My specialist area is really the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
And I think the likes of you need to expose the EU's intransigence on pharmaceuticals. They've issued their guidance. They are offering, they're basically going to treat us like a third country, whereas the MHRA, our regulatory body, are going to just simply say that anything that was good prior to Brexit is good now.
Of course.
To safeguard the safety of the public and the supply of drugs, which is the paramount issue here.
Yeah, so there is no regulatory issue here at all, Steve, is there, with us continuing to import drugs made in Europe?
Not like your previous caller, not coming in, but going to the EU, there is.
Well, do you really think that they're going to try and launch some kind of mini trade war against us just because we've left their precious club?
Well, I think they are. I take your attitude. I think they're hell-bent on the expansionist, the existence, of just simply a European Union, the elimination of nation-states, and they are defending that at all costs with all the threats and things they can muster.
So they'll go on selling us their drugs. They'll go on selling us their drugs, but be reluctant to buy ours. That's what you're really saying.
Well, yes, because they will be effectively endangering the other people who, where drugs are manufactured in this country, that then go abroad.
Do you know what, Steve?
And you really need to. You've probably done it already. You're a very well informed individual, but you really need to read that guidance, and because it just typifies the European Union's attitude to this whole aspect, and it's disgraceful. And they're an organisation that needs to be exposed. You've done your very best, but their whole attitude is, as I say, is exemplified over drugs.
Do you know what, Steve? If they were in the European Union to make it difficult for drugs made in the UK, wanted by European consumers, to go into France and Germany and Italy, they actually, in the end, would be shooting themselves in the foot. That's my view. Steve, thank you very much for your call and indeed for your kind words. Sticking with Steve's, we're up to Stevenage in Hertfordshire. Good evening.
Yeah, hello there, Nigel. Thanks for taking the call. I'm not scared of a no deal either.
Okay.
I think these trucks down in Marsden Airport, I think it's just sensible planning, really. I mean, at the end of the day, failure to prepare is to prepare for failure. I'm quite certain that the powers that be, they've done their computer modelling, as somebody texted you earlier.
They did, yeah.
And really, this is just now the live experiment, just to see that the modelling is working. I mean, we're all armchair generals, really, as far as the logistics involved is concerned. None of us really know what's going on between the ears of Grayling and his cohort.
What is anything going on between the ears of Grayling? Now, this is another debate we could spend hours on, Steve. Steve, do you feel that actually the government are being responsible about this?
Well, I think they are. I mean, I've been in the haulage business for 40 years, and I deal with more than just driving white vans and ring up every other presenter as somebody else does on LBC. But I mean, I don't fear what's ahead of us. I've seen it all before. But the only problem we will have, and I'm sure it's being addressed, is the lack of experience that we currently have in the freight offices in dealing with customs clearances, and obviously there's going to be some a good market for some freight forwarders to come into the UK and set up freight forwarding offices. And I suspect that looking at this experiment, one of the offices is going to be in Manston Airport.
So Manston Airport, we might get Pfizer back in Sandwich and Ramsgate Port open. Thanet's going to be a boom area, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and I know where to get me Viagra from, according to you then.
There you are. That's the later on phone-in show I do, Steve. But anyway, there we are. Steve, thank you. I've got time to go and speak to Tony from Haywards Heath. Good evening, Tony.
Hello, Nigel. I think it's very disappointing what you just mentioned about Manston Airport and Thanet being a boomtown, because if you'll remember 20 years ago when, as you said, there were no negative effects from us not joining the Euro, Manston Airport was actually then known as Kent International Airport.
It was briefly.
And we were on the brink of opening a new short-haul location which would bring us into more business and more trade with our European neighbours. And that has gone wrong because of a failure of integration. And now the extremists...
Because we didn't join the Euro, Tony.
Well, you know...
it's so good to have you on. I thought there was no one left, because they all deny it now. So you think we should have joined the Euro?
I think it showed, as the extremists who signed this 300,000 strong, supposedly, petition...
Extremists?
It showed that extremist isolationists...
17.4 million extremist isolationists, yeah?
Absolutely not, but 300,000, although I wonder how many of those are true signatures and not actually placed there.
Tony, do you understand something? Do you understand something? That 17.4 million of us voted to leave the European Union.
As did I.
Right. So why is it extreme to say that if there's no good deal on offer, because the government's made a Horlicks of it, we should leave on WTO terms?
Because there is a fantastic deal on offer by a patriotic Prime Minister who has done nothing but sacrifice herself for this country. She is brave, courageous and patriotic.
All right. Well, that is the strongest statement I've heard in support of Mrs May, and I thank you for making it. And I'm going to let it go unchallenged, because I have been spending too much time saying she's the worst Prime Minister in my lifetime, and I will leave Tony's comments with you and let you, over a glass of something, make your own minds up. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow from Brussels at 6. At 10 tonight it's Tom Swarbrick, but